It wasn't the sudden spike in unemployment numbers. It wasn't the crash in commercial real estate values. It wasn't even the geopolitical shock in the energy markets. It was the mathematical inevitability of the pivot. The moment central banks stop cutting rates is often celebrated. Markets view it as a return to stability. Politicians frame it as a victory over inflation. But history suggests a different outcome. The pause is not the end of the danger. The pause is the eye of the storm. The pattern is unmistakable. When a dominant power becomes addicted to cheap liquidity, withdrawal is fatal. The arithmetic is merciless. We can trace this dynamic through three specific historical epochs. The sequence never varies. First, the peak of dominance. Second, the accumulation of unsustainable costs. Third, the monetary shortcut. Fourth, the pause in debasement that triggers the collapse. Look at the Roman Empire in the 3rd century. The peak was the Pax Romana, but the costs of maintaining legions across 3 continents were crushing. The shortcut was coin clipping. Emperors like Septimius Severus began debasing the denarius to pay the troops. It worked for a time. Liquidity washed over the empire. But by 235 AD, the inflation became undeniable. The state attempted to halt the debasement to restore confidence. The result was not stability. It was a liquidity crisis that shattered the economy. Soldiers, realizing the new money would not flow, revolted. A legionnaire in Gaul could no longer feed his family on a soldier's wage. The middle class was wiped out. Flight capital moved into the only asset that held value: land. The social contract fractured, leading to 50 years of military anarchy. Just like the Roman Empire, the Spanish Empire faced the same calculus in the 16th century. Under the Habsburgs, Spain controlled the world, but the wars in Flanders were a financial black hole. Their monetary shortcut was American silver from the mines of Potosi. King Philip II flooded Europe with easy money. Prices skyrocketed. A revolution in costs made Spanish industry uncompetitive. When the flow of silver slowed, or when the crown attempted to restructure its debts, the system seized. In 1557, Philip II was forced to declare the first sovereign bankruptcy. The pause in liquidity didn't fix the economy. It exposed the insolvency of the merchant class. A shoemaker in Castile saw the price of bread triple while his savings evaporated. Wealth fled to the church and to titles of nobility. The tax shelters of the era. Spain remained a great power on paper, but its economic engine was broken. Just like the Spanish Empire, Great Britain faced this reckoning in the 20th century. After 1914, the costs of 2 world wars made the empire unaffordable. The shortcut was leaving the gold standard and devaluing sterling. For decades, British policymakers used stop-go tactics. They would cut rates to stimulate growth, then raise them to defend the pound. By the mid-1970s, the mechanism failed. Inflation soared. The government tried to pause the stimulus to curb price rises. The result was the winter of discontent. A union worker in Liverpool found his wages worthless against rising energy costs. Capital fled the country or moved into housing, pricing out the next generation. The crisis culminated in 1976. Britain, the former master of global finance, was forced to beg the IMF for a bailout. The pattern repeats in 7 distinct stages, and understanding this sequence is vital for navigating the current landscape. Stage 1 is the era of easy money. This is the period of expansion where interest rates are artificially suppressed to encourage borrowing. It feels like prosperity, but it is actually the accumulation of leverage. Asset prices rise and the cost of servicing debt is negligible. Stage 2 is the entrenchment of cost. Governments and corporations structure their entire existence around the assumption of cheap capital, supply chains, pension obligations, and social programs are all calculated using near-zero interest rate assumptions. The dependency becomes systemic. Stage 3 is the inflationary shock. Eventually, the excess liquidity chases to few goods. Prices rise, forcing the central authority to act. This leads to Stage 4, the tightening. Rates are hiked or printing is halted. The goal is to cool the economy. But because the debt load is so high, The tightening causes immediate stress in the banking sector. Stage 5 is the pause. This is the critical moment. The central bank stops hiking rates but does not yet cut them aggressively, or they stop cutting and hold steady to assess the damage. This is often interpreted as a soft landing. However, this is where the lag effect of monetary policy strikes. The refinancing wall hits. Loans taken out during stage 1 come due, and they cannot be refinanced at the new, higher rates. Stage 6 is the breakage. The weakest links in the chain snap. In history, this was the Roman soldier or the Spanish merchant. In a modern context, it is the over-leveraged regional bank, the commercial real estate developer, or the sovereign bond market of a developing nation. The liquidity dries up instantly. Stage 7 is the reaction, faced with the deflationary collapse. The central authority has only one move left. They do not just cut rates. They flood the system with an unprecedented amount of new currency to prevent total insolvency. This validates the flight to hard assets and permanently alters the value of the currency, just like the British Empire in 1976. Current data suggest we are hovering between stage 5 and stage 6. The central banks have raised rates and are now in the pause phase, hoping that inflation has been tamed without breaking the bond market. The consensus view is that technology and modern productivity gains will allow for a painless transition, a soft landing where growth continues despite higher costs. However, many economic historians argue that this view ignores the sheer scale of the debt to GDP ratio. The counterargument relies on the idea that we can grow our way out of the debt. But the arithmetic is merciless. When the interest on the debt exceeds the growth rate of the economy, the debt compounds faster than the ability to pay it. Under these constraints, the rational move for the central bank is not to maintain stability, but to choose the form of the default, either an explicit default, which is political suicide, or an implicit default through inflation. The incentive structure suggests that the pause cannot last. When the breakage occurs, the reaction will likely be swift. History shows us there are only 3 endgames for this cycle. The first endgame is controlled decline, often called financial repression. This occurred in the United States and Britain in the late 1940s and 1950s. Interest rates were capped by the government below the rate of inflation. This allowed the state to burn away its war debt at the expense of savers and bondholders. It is a slow, grinding theft of purchasing power that lasts for decades. The second endgame is chaotic collapse. This occurred in Weimar Germany in 1923 and more recently in Venezuela. The government loses the ability to tax and simply prints money to pay its daily bills. The currency enters a hyperinflationary spiral and the economy reverts to barter. In these scenarios, the middle class is entirely liquidated, and wealth concentrates in the hands of those who own productive assets and foreign currency. The third endgame is a reset and restructure. This happened with the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944 and the Nixon shock in 1971. The rules of the global monetary system are rewritten overnight. Currencies are revalued, pegged to a new anchor, or replaced entirely. In 1933, this involved the confiscation of gold and the revaluation of the dollar. In a modern context, this could involve the introduction of new digital instruments or a debt jubilee. The only variable is timing and pain. Subscribe to this channel to track the data as it evolves. Educate yourself on the history of money, build resilience in your personal supply chains, and pay close attention to the actions of the central banks, not their words.